The river brings the last queen. Hello, Quadzilla! Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. If you're new to the channel, I specialize in humor and education. I break down the notable hands I play during my sessions along with my thinking process. If you're here to find out how I made enough to afford an Aero MDX with only the revenue I made from a single month of playing 2-5 No Limit Hold'em, hang out until the end of the video. Check out some of my other videos as well to get a sense of how much I generally win in any given session. So far in our journey together, I've won the last 18 sessions in a row. In fact, I haven't lost a single session since May 14th. I only have 2 losing sessions since April 11th. Am I just some lucky bastard son running? Although I don't understand why I would run from my son, he's only 2 years old. Or do I actually possess some modicum of skill that allows me to mitigate losses? You be the judge. We're here to play some 2-5 at the Win Encore in Las Vegas, where I buy in for $1,500, which is 300 big blinds. It's 3 in the morning. 10 minutes into the session, there's a live 10. I open to 25 in the cutoff with King 10 of spades. Only the small blind calls. The flop comes 10 high, rainbow. This is a much better than average flop if I do say so myself. When the small blind checks, I put in a larger than normal half pot bet of 35. He calls, and we go to a turn which is the king of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board. Suddenly, he leads out, but only for a tiny bet of $30, which is less than my flop bet. I recognize he's trying to get a cheap draw with whatever he's holding, and seeing as our hand just improved, that's not going to happen. I put in a healthy raise to 150. He folds, but we earn a healthy start to our session. Another 10 minutes later, we're down to 5-handed. I open to 15 on the button with ace-king offsuit. The small blind 3-bets me to 60. The small blind is my savagely handsome friend Daniel, who also goes by the name Rain Delay on the interwebs. Or at least, I refer to him as my friend. I don't think he actually knows my name. Oh, notice me, senpai! Daniel thinks I'm a super nit for some reason. Oh, Daniel, I have moves for days. I just don't want you to see them. I hide them in my naughty places because I don't want you to think I'm a bad girl. When the big blind code calls, I 4-bet to 205. Most people who open to 3x on the button against the blinds do it extremely light, so it's perfectly normal to re-raise them with any decent hand ranging from King Jack, Jack 10 suited, Ace 10 off, to a middling pocket pair like 8s, 9s, or 10s. When you meet resistance in the form of a 4-bet, however, now you might be in trouble. Daniel tanks for about a minute and a half before folding. He knows he'll be playing out of position for the rest of the hand, and he respects me as a player. Here, I happen to have ace-king, but I would play the exact same way with my top 3 premium-made hands like queens, kings, or aces. The big blind reluctantly folds as well. We're up $212 only 20 minutes into the session. It's another 45 minutes before we play our next notable hand. Here, we open to 15 on the button with pocket 5s. Only the big blind calls. The flop comes 10, jack, 6 with 2 hearts. When the big blind checks it to me, I check it back. Suddenly, we get a beautiful turn card. It's the 5 of spades. We make a set. Now, the big blind decides to lead, but to a disappointing bet of $10. This is the second time he's attempted to do this against me, leading with a bet that's a pittance of the pot. So of course, we have to punish him for a second time yet again. I raise to 50. He folds, but it's always nice to smash a set, even if it's delayed until the turn. Here, we have Queen 8 of hearts in the big blind. The cutoff opens to 20. The small blind calls. Heads up and out of position, I would throw this garbage away without a second thought. But here, since it's multi-way, I call. The flop comes queen, queen, 2, rainbow. We flop trips with a weak kicker. The action gets checked around. The turn brings an ace, but the board is still rainbow. I'm split between betting here to get value out of an ace, and also deny equity from any small pocket pair that might get a free draw to a boat. If it gets checked through a second time, most people would take a stab at the pot with this ace, whether they have one or not, so I decide to check. If our opponent does decide to bet, I would just flat call. We have trips, yes, but the board is still rainbow. If we're ahead, there's not a lot we're afraid of. If our opponent has a strong ace, we can corner him into a spot where he thinks he can get value on the river out of a smaller ace. Plus, if we're behind, in the instance our opponent is carrying hands like king-queen or jack-queen, we'll keep the pot manageable. The original raiser checks back the ace. The river brings the last queen. Hello, Quadzilla! Unfortunately, no one's shown any interest in this hand. When the small blind checks it over to me, I'm hoping someone hit that ace, so I throw a massive overbet of 150. Either someone has that ace, or no one has anything capable of calling the smallest of bets anyways. Both opponents quickly fold. It's the first quads I've made in like 3 months. It wasn't for a very big win, but hey, at least I've won every single notable hand I've played so far tonight. Our table breaks, and I move to a different 5-handed table. I open for 15 in the cutoff with ace deuce of hearts. The button 3-bets me to 50 with a $1,500 stack. It's Jacksepticeye visiting the States to play some poker from Ireland. Just kidding, his name is Gary. Normally, this would be an easy fold, especially out of position, but since we're short-handed right now, any suited ace is pretty strong. I decide to call.
Round 1. Fight!
The board comes out King, Jack, 2, Rainbow. We flop bottom pair with a backdoor flush draw and a backdoor draw to Broadway. I check to the button, who down bets at 30. Nothing to do here but call. The turn is the Queen of Diamonds. This board greatly favors my opponent's range. If he were to bet here, I would just fold. Surprisingly, when I check, he checks it back. I'm confused. Maybe he has a small pocket pair like 9s or 10s or a hand like 7-8 suited? When the river brings in the deuce of diamonds, I'm not really concerned about the backdoor flush. Maybe I can get a crying call out of ace-king, who's really only beating a bluff on this type of board. It's time to go for some value. I slide in a single black chip, betting $100 into the pot of 160. Maybe I can get a crying call out of ace-queen, or a plethora of different king-x hands that checked back the turn for pot control. Unfortunately, our opponent folds, and we move on. We've lost a player, so now we're down to 4-handed. There's a live 10, so I raise to 40 in the small blind with pocket 7s. The straddle calls. We flop top set on a flop of 7, 6, 4, Rainbow. But unfortunately, the cards are all super connected. We can't check this type of board. We don't want our opponent to get a free card and hit some kind of straight, forcing us to pay huge. Plus, when you're only 4-handed, your opponent is likely to call multiple bets as long as they flop any piece of the board. I put in a tiny down bet to 30. He folds, but flopping a set is always nice. Here, the small blind, our Irish friend, buys the button. Big blind limps. I open to 20 on the button with king 9 of spades. The small blind calls, but the big blind folds, after limping even versus my small raise.
Round 2. Fight!
Never do that, guys. Never limp with a hand so incredibly weak that you can't even call a small raise, even after someone else is called. The flop comes queen, queen, 10, Rainbow. We flop a gut shot straight with a backdoor flush draw and one over to a naked 10. When the small blind checks, I see bet another 20 and he calls. If you could wish for any one card on the turn, what would it be? If you guess the jack of spades, you're right. We make the second nut straight, and we're also drawing to a straight flush. Is it too much to ask that our opponent is holding a queen here? A queen of spades on the river would be astonishing. When the small blind checks, I bet 50, and he calls. The river is an 8 of spades. We improve to a flush, but that's inconsequential. I'm not really concerned about that. We were already ahead of a queen on the turn. The small blind leads out to a hefty 80% pot bet of 150. If this had been a full table, I would do some pot controlling and just call here. Sure, we have a sneaky backdoor flush, but we're losing to every full house combination and this board is extremely connected. Playing only 4-handed, however, I need to extract as much value as possible out of a naked queen, straight or even smaller flush. I raise to 335, which is barely a min raise. My opponent tanks. He then shows he has 10-9 offsuit for a runner-runner straight, but lays it down. What an incredible fold 4-handed. I mean, it's admittedly a 1-card straight, so he's only beating a complete bluff, but it's still a really hard fold to make 4-handed. Here I have ace-deuce offsuit in the big blind. The button opens to 15. I have an ace, and we're still 4-handed, so I call. In a full ring, I would lean heavily towards folding this garbage, even in the big blind, because position matters a lot more than the $5 you've invested. The flop comes 5 high with 2 deuces and 2 clubs. I check it over to my opponent, who c-bets 20. This guy's on the tighter side, so I think he credibly has an overpair here. I raise to 60, and he calls. The turn is an inconsequential 8 of hearts. I'm only worried if he has pocket 8s. Let's find out what he does. I lead for another non-committal bet of 60. He thinks for a moment, but eventually folds. If he had bombed this turn, I think I would have just folded. Sure, we have 3 2s with an ace kicker, but we're up against someone tight. He could credibly have pocket 5s or pocket 8s, and then we'd be drawing to only 1 out. You always have to keep your audience in mind when you're figuring out how to play a hand. Here, I have 6-7 of clubs in the small blind. We're still only 4-handed. The button opens to 20. I call, and the big blind calls. The flop comes 7 high. I have top pair and a gut shot straight, along with the backdoor flush draw as well. The original raiser is pretty conservative, so I decide to deny equity to random overcards by leading with a half-pot bet of 30. The big blind suddenly raises me to 100. The original raiser folds. This guy, on the other hand, our good friend Gary, is much more liable to pull moves. I'm not going anywhere 4-handed. I call.
Round 3. Fight!
The turn is a queen of clubs. I like it. I now have a backdoor flush draw to go along with everything else I have going on. I check to the aggressor, fully expecting to call another huge bet, but he checks it back. Oh, come on, Gary. Is this why you're not married yet? Do you have commitment issues? I guess he's scared, and rightfully so, because I would definitely calling another bet. The river pairs the board with another queen. If I was ahead on the flop, I'm still ahead. I check. My opponent checks it back. I table my hand for the win. Currently up $530, 2 hours and 15 minutes into the session. About half an hour later, we finally get some new players, so now we're 7-handed. There's a straddle. I open to 40 in the cutoff with pocket 10s. It folds around to the small blind, who 3-bets me to 150 with $1,500 behind. This is a massive raise. He looks like a super tight old guy. He has enough behind for me to equitably call here and set mine, since it's 110 more and he has over 1,100 behind. So I call in position. The flop comes king high with no 10. So when he leads for another $100 bet, I just fold. He could easily have kings, aces, or even ace-king here. I may have won a lot of hands so far, but they were all pretty small pots. This was our first substantial loss, cutting our gains down to only $248. 5 minutes later, I open to 15 under the gun with ace-deuce of hearts again. The +1 3-bets me to 50. He's the same guy I've been playing short-handed with earlier, who also 3-bet me when I had the same exact hand. It's our Irish friend Gary again. He seems to give up after meeting any resistance though, like when I had the 6-7 of clubs earlier, and also the first time when I river trip deuces with the same hand. So against that type of player, I'm not going anywhere. I call.
Round 4. Fight!
The flop comes 10 high, rainbow. I have diddly squat, except the backdoor flush draw. I check, and he checks behind. Oh, goody, I've already won. Bro has ace-king or ace-queen. Although these hands are technically beating me at the moment, none of that matters. The turn brings in a 4 of spades, keeping the board rainbow. I don't even have so much as a gut shot draw, but I do have evil intentions. I ready my thieves' dagger. I check it over to my opponent, who puts in a tiny bet of $35. Oh, come on, man. You're seriously going to try to bet tiny now after checking the flop? The only credible hands he could possibly have here is top set or the nut straight with a 7-8 suited type of hand, but those hands are more likely to be in my range.
Finish him!
I raise here to 105, with no draw whatsoever, other than the weakness I smell. My opponent folds immediately, stating that he should have checked back the turn. Here, we're 6-handed with a straddle on. The cutoff opens to 30. We have Jack-Queen of hearts on the button. I can go either way here, between calling or raising, as you've seen me do previously on the vlog. I don't want to be predictable though, so I don't often make the same moves with the same hand in the same position. With this hand, in this position, it's usually about 50-50, whether I 3-bet or not. Here, I elect to just call. The small blind calls as well. The straddler suddenly 3-bets to 160 with a $1,200 stack. The cutoff folds. If I had a hand like a small pocket pair in this position, I would actually just fold. I wouldn't be getting the right implied odds to call. With Jack-Queen suited, however, this hand plays great post-flop. I call. The small blind folds, so we go heads up. The flop comes 4, 6, 8 with 2 hearts. This is actually a really good flop. I can credibly pretend I flopped a set on this board, but that's only if my plans of spiking the flush fails. My opponent c-bets a paltry $100. I consider raising. However, the last thing we would want is for a big overpair like kings or aces to jam on us. With the trapped money, I'd be forced to call with only 37% equity. That's not where I want to be in life, so I like to just call. The turn brings the ace of hearts. Bing! We make the second nuts. My opponent slows down and checks. In a heads-up match, this ace is actually usually better for his range than mine. I'm rarely supposed to have a flush here. Here, I lean 75% towards betting with our hand, even though the vast majority of hands are drawing dead. If he had a hand like ace-king with the king of hearts, he would already have bet himself. If I were to bet, I would use an insulting bet like 175 into the pot of 580. Of the plausible hands we're up against, only a top set of aces, or the king of hearts, is drawing live to our hand. So we don't have to go for huge value. I'm not sure my opponent has anything at all though, with how ultra meek he played the post flop. For the vast majority of players, most people with an overpair to the flop would have bet at least 200 or even higher, targeting a hand like 9s or 10s, or even a pair with a gut shot like 7s. I decide to check the action back to see if he'll try to stab at the river. The river is another 5 of hearts. This makes me sad. My opponent checks again. Now I'm thinking he was just trying to squeeze pre-flop and has given up. I go for a super tiny, I dare you to try something bet of 100, hoping to provoke him into making a mistake. No, I don't have the nuts, and yes, I am losing to a naked king of hearts, but this is what separates a pro from an amateur. If my opponent raises or even shoves here, I'm calling. You don't always need the nuts to try to get some thin value. Recognize the situation at hand and how it played out. The vast majority of the time, a king of hearts would have already bet again on the turn, or at least by the river. There is no king to be afraid of here. My opponent tanks for a long while. He's facing a $100 bet to win a pot of $680. I bet he's also contemplating whether or not he can steal this pot, and what sort of opponent he's up against. Eventually, he decides to cut his losses and just give up. Now we're up $641, close to the 3-hour mark. For this next hand, we're back down to 4-handed. The cutoff opens to 15. I call on the button with King 4 suited. The flop comes King, Queen, 3, Rainbow with 1 club. She makes a continuation bet for another 15. Nothing for me to do here but call. The turn brings a 10 of diamonds. Now there's 2 diamonds on board, but this doesn't help us at all. We didn't make a backdoor draw of any kind. Incrementally, she ups the ante with a slightly higher bet of 45. Normally, on a full or near full table, this is the point where I fold. However, we're currently 4-handed, which is not my specialty at all. I'm a math guy. I perform much better on a full table. Top pair is usually pretty good short-handed though. We're still beating hands like Ace-Queen, Jack-Queen, or the backdoor flush draw, but that's about it. I decide to call. The river is an inconsequential 6 of spades. My opponent fires a 3rd bullet for 75. I really want to fold here. Opponents rarely fire 3 bullets without having it, whatever it is. Sigh. I figure if I called on the turn, I'm forced to call the river. It'd be $75 to win a pot of what would be $305, meaning I only have to be right 25% of the time. I'm not loving it, but I make a crying call. My opponent chose King 10 for 2 pairs, and we sulk back into the gutters in disgrace. For this next hand, we're still playing 4-handed. There's a straddle on. The button folds. The small blind raises to 35. I have 10 jack of diamonds in the big blind, which is a great hand to play in position, so we call. The straddle calls as well. The flop comes Jack, 9, 3, Rainbow with 1 diamond. I flop top pair with a backdoor flush draw and a backdoor straight draw as well. This is a better than average flop, especially short-handed. The small blind c-bets another 35. Nothing to do here but call. The straddle gets out of the way. The turn is a beautiful king of diamonds. The small blind continues her story with another bet of 75. This doesn't really relate strength or weakness short-handed, so don't misinterpret it. She might have a big hand, but is afraid of the obvious straight draw completing. She could have ace-jack and is afraid of the king. She might even have the nuts with queen 10 herself and is trying to get value out of me. There's no telling. We're not going anywhere with our hand though. If we were behind, that king massively helped us. We just picked up 2 backdoor draws, so we call. The river is the best card we could have hoped for. It's a 7 of diamonds, completing our disguised backdoor flush. Time to collect her soul. Unfortunately, she checks it over to us. Sad times. If you ever make a backdoor flush, I advise making a huge bet versus a small value bet. It's rare to backdoor into something monstrous, so you should always try to get value out of it. I go for a massive bet of 275 into the pot of 330. I've seen this girl pay off consistently to other players whenever she has anything. She's not the type to fold top or middle pair. Unfortunately, she folds without even taking 10 seconds to think about it, which makes me think my King 4 call earlier wasn't completely terrible. She was likely betting this hand incredibly light. In any case, the Empire strikes back against Leia. Our table breaks, but I have to wait half an hour to get a seat at the new table. It's currently 6:50 in the morning. There's a straddle on. I'm next to act in the +1. I consider opening with a small raise, but our 4 is a bit too weak to handle most flops, especially out of position, so I elect to just limp. It folds around to the small blind, who raises the action up to 40. The big blind suddenly 3-bets to 120. The straddler folds. I ask how much our opponent has, and he says around 2,000. I have him slightly covered. Normally, a pocket pair as small as mine should be an easy fold when facing a bet and a 3-bet, before the action even gets to me. You never want to be trapped between 2 aggressors raising back and forth with a hand that might never even see a flop. However, in this case, it's a bit different, as I think the small blind was just juicing up the pot. His raise out of position wasn't big enough to indicate a big hand. Only the big blind should have a big hand here, and our stacks definitely justify a call. I put in the 110 more. The small blind gets out of the way. The flop comes 2 aces with a 5 and 2 spades. My opponent down bets to 80. I double check my hand to see if I'm carrying a spade. I don't want to call here without a spade, because if I hit one of my miracle 2 outs, but it's a spade, I could lose massive amounts of value. I have just under 5% of hitting a 4 with this next card, so I would need over 20 to 1 on my money to call this $80 bet. There's a very high chance my opponent is carrying an ace here, and we both have over 1600 remaining. Plus, there's always the chance he's trying to single out the small blind in position to the original raiser with his 3-bet with a hand like 10-jack suited or some such. So I make the call. The turn is the 4 of clubs. Hallelujah! I hit gin, and I don't even drink. I'm super sad when my opponent checks it to me though. I hope he's trying to trap with ace-king. A modest bet for me here should still get a legitimate big pair like kings or queens to call. Boards with 2 aces are less frightening for a big pair than boards with a single ace. I bet 200 into the pot of 450. My opponent takes less than 20 seconds to make the call. The river is the 8 of spades, which I'm not loving. This might kill the action. My opponent suddenly fires out $430. He has just under 1200 behind, which is less than a pot-sized bet. The 8 is a very safe card. It's not a Broadway card, so I don't have to worry about a boat. If it were a king or a queen, I would just smooth call this river bet. But an 8? I like this 8. I just wish it wasn't a spade, because the odds of my opponent having a random flush here is much less likely than if he just had a big ace. There's not much math to think about here. I can't think of a single raise I can make here that isn't an all-in, so that's what I do.
Shake it, baby.
I go for the gold and stick my finger up his nose with a shove. My opponent tanks for a full minute before folding. He would later reveal he was holding a big ace. Small blind reveals he was also carrying an ace, so between the two of them, it wasn't hard to figure out that I had a full house of some kind. We're now up a delicious $1,411. For this next hand, we're holding king 10 of spades in the small blind. The straddle is still on. The low jack opens to 30. I call. We go heads up out of position to flop of king, jack, 9 with 2 clubs. I check to my opponent, who puts in a c-bet of 30. Nothing to do here but call. The turn brings in an insignificant 3 of diamonds. I check, and my opponent ramps up his bet sizing to $85. Still, nothing we can do but call. We have top pair, a decent kicker, and a gut shot straight draw facing a bet from someone in position who could have any number of weaker hands. The river brings in another insignificant card. It's the 4 of spades. All of the draws have bricked out. I check again with plans of snap calling any pot-sized bet. There's no point leading though. This is a check call type of hand. My opponent gives up and checks it back. We table our hand and it's good for a modest win. For this next hand, the straddle is still on. The low jack opens to 25 with about a $1,500 stack. I 3-bet at 125 with ace-king offsuit in the hijack. Everyone else folds to the original raiser who calls. We go heads up in position. The flop comes queen, 9, 7, rainbow. He checks. I make a continuation bet to 75 into the pot of 265, and he calls. This isn't telling at all. For that price and our stack sizes, he can call with most of his range, anywhere from a pocket pair, a gut shot straight draw like king-jack suited, or even ace-queen for top pair top kicker. The turn is a 5 of spades, bringing 2 spades on board. He checks it to me. I have a decision to make here. I can give up the $200 I've invested, or I can really put him to the test and force all small to medium pocket pairs to fold that didn't already flop a set. Seeing as I'm married with children, I for one do not have commitment issues. I choose the path of violence. I throw out a hefty bet of 225. My opponent calls almost instantly. This is extremely telling. Ace-queen might take a moment to decide on his options. If he calls here, he'll be forced to potentially face an extremely massive river bet of 600 or more if I have an overpair. It's a credible enough threat to make any opponent pause for at least a second or two, if not a considerable amount longer. But my opponent didn't skip a beat. This is only ever a draw. When the river brings a board pairing 7 of diamonds, I'm loving it. Ba-doop boop boop boop. Here, my opponent starts tanking for the first time this hand. I can almost see the gears whirling in his head. He's wondering if he can steal his pot, and how much he would need to risk to do so. The longer he takes, the more confident I become. 30 seconds pass. I've made up my mind that if he fires a pot-sized bet of 500 or 600, I'm snap calling with my ace high. An overbet would make me actually have to think though. Instead, he finally checks. No point betting against a misdraw, so I check it back as well. My opponent doesn't show, so you can hear me confidently guess his hand aloud and instantly table my ace high for the win as if it were aces.
10 jack.
Here, we look down at our least favorite premium hand. It's this piece of dookie that everyone loves, the cocaine that all the kids are into. It's the 4th time that we've had them on the vlog. Surely we'll beat that $100 in profit now, right? I open to 20 under the gun and get the cutoff and big blind to call. The flop comes ace, 7, 8 with 2 clubs. The big blind and I both check to the cutoff, who leads for $30. The big blind suddenly raises to 125. I swear, I should just listen to my wife and fold this crap pre-flop. Of course, I can only fold now. The hand plays out with the cutoff winning a huge pot with ace-10 offsuit against a smaller ace. They have 2 outs total between the both of them. Factor in my elite Asian math skills into this equation, I think the odds were close to like 99% that they were going to outflop my pocket kings here. So you know what that means. It's time to rack up. I'm in for $1,500 and out for $31.29 for a total profit of $16.29 after 3 hours and 49 minutes of actual playtime. If you've made it all the way to the end, I guess it's time to reveal how well I did for the month of June. I won a total of $16,684 with only 55 hours of playtime. That averages to over $300 an hour while playing less than 15 hours a week. The Aero I purchased wasn't exactly new, so I was able to haggle down the price to $15,500. If you like my content and enjoy my humor or hand analysis like the soft caress of a lover, please take a quick second to hit that like button. Subscribe to my channel if you wish to support my journey as a content creator and poker vlogger. Don't forget that notification bell if you wish to be alerted when I release new videos. I know I've only showcased wins so far, but don't worry. We're headed for some extremely rough waters in July. I'm going to definitely need your help and support to avoid a trip to the welfare office. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.